Hello, everyone. I really appreciate you for joining today. I am Regina Celestin Williams, the Executive Director at SV at Home, and we're excited to host you all for a thoughtful conversation about the 2024 legislative update. Policy in Action at Home is a monthly informal discussion convening housers to engage on hot housing topics. Every month, we select a topic or current event, bring in an expert or two to give a brief presentation, and then open up the discussion to ask questions, float new ideas, and identify potential areas for shared action. And so really excited about the moment we're in to hear a little bit about what's going on in our legislature. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamian Nation, and Nama Mutsun tribal band, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land and who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. So with that, again, welcome. I will pass it along to today's moderator, Cory Wolbach, our Civic Engagement Senior Associate. Cory?
Thank you so much, Regina, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're really looking forward to and excited about this conversation, especially with our guest, JT Harechmak from NPH. Before we get into JT's presentation and our Q&A, first, I would just want to share our code of conduct. So we really want to ensure that the conversation and the relationships here today remain respectful and productive. So please be kind and courteous to each other. Please try to refrain from rude comments or personal attacks in the chat. We do encourage asking questions in the chat and listening as we learn and engage with each other. Please remember that today's event is focused on this legislative update, so please try to keep the conversation on topic. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes the chat can get a little lively, and if you find it distracting, if it's distracting you from the content of the discussion, we encourage you to consider closing the chat for yourself. And I do want to say, hopefully it's not an issue, but if anybody is disruptive or otherwise violates the code of conduct, they may be removed with or without warning. Now, with that out of the way, it's my great pleasure to introduce JT Harechmak from NPH. So JT joined NPH in May of 2022, where he currently serves as Senior Policy Manager. He works on state and federal advocacy efforts at NPH. He leads the regulatory and the legislative working groups, which are, by the way, open to all NPH members. Prior to joining NPH, JT has had a number of roles relevant to housing. He's been a legislative aide. He's been an affordable housing development consultant. He was a resident and board member of a student housing co-op in Austin, Texas. He's been a researcher on permanent supportive housing, a project manager for a rapid rehousing prototype home, and a fair housing advocate focused on equitable disaster recovery. JT holds a BA in environmental studies and political science from Santa Clara University and a master's in public affairs from UT Austin. So, JT, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Cory, and all of the SV at Home folks. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to join you for the PIA here. We'll go through a little presentation here today that I'm going to do high level and take a look at the budget, the bonds, how to get involved in your state level budget advocacy in budget cycles to come. And we'll do a little review of the 2024 legislative session, and I'll talk about the housing bills that I saw and the themes that I think they all kind of fit under today. And then we'll go ahead and do a little bit of a conversation with Cory and take some questions from the group here. So let's go ahead and start with the first slide here. The thing that really hovered over this whole legislative session was the 2024 budget deficit. As you can see here, the last few years of the California budget have been good. There have been great surpluses from Basically since the really, really dismal 2013, 2014 time here where we lost the redevelopment agencies and there was drastic action to balance the California budget. But what happened? What happened with 2024? Why is there such a precipitous drop off here? Well, it was that revenue slowed over 2022, 2023, and the delay from a number of natural disasters created delays for the filing of people's income taxes to the state at the federal level here. So people were kind of flying blind on that 2023 legislative session when they were putting a budget together, and they were basically spending money that wasn't coming in. So surprise, once those tax returns were finally filed, we had a much more significant budget deficit than people had expected. And now, because of this, there are a few ways to address a budget deficit. You can either increase your revenue or you can decrease your spending. And because of priorities expressed at our governor's level here, wasn't interested in pursuing new opportunities for revenue here and instead focused on balancing this budget through a number of cuts. So let's take a look at those cuts on the next slide. With the January budget proposal that the governor put out, most of these programs here that I'm talking about on this slide were completely zeroed out. And the money that we got in this budget doesn't really represent additional wins for housing, but rather that we got money back that would have otherwise been cut. So we were really starting out from the worst case scenario here of a lot of these programs being removed. Through budget advocacy work over the course of the spring and the summer, we were able to get a lot of these programs refunded. So HCD's multifamily housing program, which is a very flexible program that supports a lot of our members, the nonprofit affordable housing developers in the Bay Area, as well as the REAP program, which is more important to our city partners here, the REAP 2.0 Regional Early Action Program. This is for city planning grants. We got most of that money back, but as you can see in the column to the right of that, we still lost 10 million in that MHP and 40 million in that REAP, which is, all things considered, much better than having those programs fully cut. Back over to that, the plus category here, we were also able to fully reinstate the state housing tax credit, the enhanced state housing tax credit. And this was an easier ask of the government here to ask them to do a state housing tax credit in years in the future, rather than ask them to spend money now. This was also a really enticing opportunity to a lot of the legislators because the state housing tax credit is part of the low-income housing tax credit program. It goes a really long way in leveraging additional funding. So by cutting these 500 million, they would have cut a lot more dollars from the budget that came from other sources. So it was very easy to convince people to put this one back in. Big bang for the buck. We also got back 14 million in housing navigation for foster youth, and we got a whopping 1 billion back into the budget for homeless housing assistance and prevention, as well as, and this last one split over a couple of years in this budget, but another $250 million for encampment resolutions. So what did we lose here? What were we not able to refund? The adaptive reuse program took a major hit. HCD's infill infrastructure grant, as well as HCD's VIP program for veterans, that's the VHPP there. These are programs that are often spoken about in concert with the MHP program, that multifamily housing program. Collectively, they make up a significant portion of the supernova. You may also hear people talk about the supernova, and these things also took a hit. Given the choice between a number of these programs, the MHP is the most flexible, so we are glad that that one was funded. But all of these cuts were extremely painful, and are going to need to, our members need to realign what they're going to be doing to account for a lot of these funding sources that dried up. Some of the most painful ones here were the foreclosure intervention program here, FIP, and the affordable home ownership program, CalHome. These are programs that were entirely zeroed out in this year's budget. They may be refunded in other years to come, but in the years that we are expecting to come, they are completely zeroed out, and that really hurts. So let's talk about the next slide here. So in concert with the discussion about the budget that goes on from January through its eventual signing in the middle of the summer, there's also this discussion of bonds. So the state has to make up the difference on their budget end. We also have lots of discussions about what can be put to the voters to ask them to fund. So this happens in parallel. And a bond needs robust support from not only the Democratic caucuses in each house, because they are, quite frankly, the majority of the legislature there, and the governor's office. They all work in partnership. These are kind of parallel negotiations to the larger budget negotiation. One of the limiting factors here is bonding capacity. The state of California has a bond rating from the financial organizations that determine bond ratings, kind of like your credit score, but for a state. And we can only spend so much on bonding capacity before our bond rating goes down. And if our bond rating goes down, then it becomes more expensive, more costly for us to borrow that money. And then we have limited impact with that. So we had organized support for climate, for schools, and for housing, all vying for that state's limited capacity on bonding. And ultimately, climate and schools prevailed here, but housing probably traded our bond, the AB 1657 from Wicks, for a $10 billion bond to be put to voters in November. This was ultimately traded for getting a lot of our housing allocations back in the budget. The climate folks, the schools folks did not fare as well in this budget discussion because a lot of their things were going to be pushed to November to be asked for the voters to support. Let's go to the next. All right, so I hinted at this a little bit, but we have a January process, or we have this whole year-long state budget advocacy process, starting in January with the governor's January proposal. Let's go to the next one. May to June is kind of like final season, crunch time for us to finish that budget, to get it through the legislature, to get it to the governor. And then I want to talk about this last one more. This is where we currently are here. The budget season really doesn't end in California because the January proposal is really not that far away for next year's budget. So we are in the what off season section here. If these housing cuts were hard on you, if they were hard on your organization, it's really important now to be reaching out to your local electeds for the state house, the state assembly, as well as the Senate, and anyone else that you can reach out to in the state government here to demonstrate how those housing cuts have affected not only your work, but your community and housing in general. And if the more tangible you can make these impacts to someone's district to show them like housing development that isn't going forward, probably because of these cuts, or maybe services that had to have been scaled back because of these cuts and what it specifically means for someone's district, you want to do that explaining now, because when the January budget proposal comes out, everyone wants to talk to people that are involved in the budget process, and you want to be building off of a good relationship you already have or groundwork you've already done now. Let's go to the next one. To put some faces on this outreach here, the previous slide talked about some reaching out to the big three here. The big three would be the governor, the Speaker of the House, Assemblymember Rivas, and the Senate Pro Tem, Mr. Mark McGuire. These are the folks that are most important in that May to June middle section. Before that, you get to the budget chairs for the various houses. We have Assemblymember Gabriel there and Senator Wiener, who are both chairs of their respective budget committees. They are important folks to do outreach to as well. And then one step lower than that, we have the budget subcommittees. Here I have Assemblymember Quirk Silva, who was a really, really strong champion for housing over this last budget cycle. And we have her to thank for a lot of the reinstated money in that, as well as Assemblymember Gabriel and Assemblymember Smallwood Cuevas, who did a lot of work on the House side to reinstate a lot of that housing funding. We didn't have as many champions over on the Senate. Senator Wiener often is very supportive of housing, But the housing bond really struggled over on that side. But it's clear in the House under Speaker Rivas that housing was a very, very big priority for them. So, and then again, step 4, reaching out to your local legislators, as I mentioned. Let's go to the next. All right. So let's back up then and talk about the state legislative process that we've already gone through so far this year. This happens, of course, in parallel with the budget that I've already talked about. January 3rd is when we got back together this year. And then in February, there is a deadline for when all of the bills need to be introduced. Then in May, this is the last day that a bill has to leave its first house. This is the Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a bill portion of the presentation here. And then in August, this is the last day for the bill to leave its second house. That's Senator Mark McGuire there, pro tem of the Senate. And then the September 30th is the last day for the governor to sign. So where are we right now? If you click one more time, we are right here. So there are a number of bills we're going to talk about today, but I just want to be clear that these bills are not a done deal. These bills still have a few weeks left to get out of their second house. And then after that, they still need to survive the governor's veto process here. One other complicating factor here is that you may be aware that there is a Democratic National Convention going on this week. So many of the California state legislators took the week off to be there, meaning that next week is going to be absolutely packed to make sure that bills can get through and meet these last deadlines here. They will probably be meeting through Saturday. And I don't know if they will try to extend any time to get any of these bills through. But I say this to say this is where we are in the process, and that the bills we talk about now are not in effect, and we don't assume that they're all going into effect. These are just bills that have survived to the later stage of the legislature this year. Let's go to the next one. So we talked about the budget, and we talked about how the deficit really hung over this whole legislative session this year. Another factor here is that this is the second year of the 2-year California legislative cycle, which means that big ideas are often saved for the first year of the cycle, and that smaller ideas or what's left over, things that, if we just try to run a bill to run a bill's sake, these are the kinds of things we see more in the second year when people are a little bit more focused on perhaps their re-election campaigns for the impending November election. So we didn't have tons of big bills here, but we do still have some good ones that I want to let you know about. And it's easier to talk about them in categories and themes rather than just to go through a list in numerical order here. So what did I see this year? I saw a number of bills talking about the builder's remedy, which is something that's been discussed a lot down in the South Bay with your builder's remedy project you all had in reverse to make a smaller project. I saw a number of bills on the Coastal Commission, which is less relevant here to the South Bay, not having a ton of land under the purview of the Coastal Commission. The Surplus Land Act was somewhere where the NPH was very active. This is an important piece of legislation for our members, allowing for a right of first offer of affordable housing developers to land that's been declared surplus by local governments. We saw an update bill for RENA. We saw a few bills on tenant protections. We saw one on preservation of affordable housing that would be terming out of its affordable period. Saw a number of bills on simplifying development. And then finally, I want to talk about some slow progress that we've made. There's a number of issues that are incredibly difficult that we are still not being able to get our legislative arms around. And there were some valiant efforts to try to address some of these things that were either stymied by other legislative forces against them, or just the fact that we really haven't come up with a good policy solution to some of these things yet. So yeah, let me get into a few of those. Let's talk a little bit about these with bill numbers. Builder's Remedy had 2 big bills to discuss. I'll start with the Alvarez bill. This one's much simpler. AB 1886 from Alvarez establishes the primacy of the HCD determination letter, saying that the builder's remedy is in fact in place for a community if they haven't met their obligations yet. This has been something that's been contested in court. So this is a legislative response to some drama that's happened before. AB 1893 from Wicks is more specifically aimed at the dilemma that you all saw in the South Bay, looking at how you can use the builder's remedy to scale back your density. And this sets a minimum and maximum density actually for this bill. Previously, there was no minimum or maximum. So this has been a carefully navigated bill from Wicks to entertain a lot of different parties on this one. There were some proposed changes here on the affordability requirement, and I looked through it again this morning. I think that they have been taken out. There was a change from a 20% requirement, I think, to a 10%. I don't think that survived. So really, it's just focusing on that change in density. We also had a lot of discussions about the Coastal Commission. Both Senator Wiener and Senator Blakespear really took this one up. This has been a personal crusade for Senator Wiener and Senator Blakespear as being a representative from the San Diego area. This has been very relevant to housing development down there. The Coastal Commission adds another layer of approval for affordable housing developments. And they like to think of themselves as very supportive of affordable housing, but they have been absolutely another roadblock in development when our members have tried to develop in these coastal communities that have often extremely high cost of living and very low wage work that needs to be done. And a lot of these bills did not fare very well. Senator Wiener really tried to take this up with a number of bills. I think the one that got fairly far but has now been severely limited is SB 951. And Blakespear had another bill, SB 1092, that was whittled down and whittled down and whittled down and has now been held in approps. I think in its final form, it was just kind of a study bill. And a study bill is kind of, I don't know, the last ditch effort you have to kind of continue a bill moving forward is to have your bill be like, okay, well, we can't solve this problem now, but what if we commissioned a study about it? And even that didn't really make it through. So the Coastal Commission is definitely a force to be reckoned with here. And some very good legislators have not been able to make much progress on it. Another area where NPH very active is Surplus Land Act, and rather defending the Surplus Land Act. We ran a large update to this bill along with our partners at EBHO, Public Advocates, and San Diego Housing Federation, and the Public Interest Law Project a number of years ago. And this is, again, this right of first offer for affordable housing developers to pick up land. It's a very difficult thing to find land in the Bay Area, in a place where it's already very built out. And these public lands present a really big opportunity for our developers to be able to get in before the rest of the market can make an offer and make their case to cities and counties, special districts that are, that have a RENA obligation to make a lot of units. And then they may be able to partner with them and offer this opportunity to develop a lot of good affordable housing here. The problem here is that it does require a lot of effort from locals to make sure that they follow the careful process that's outlined by the bill to declare their land surplus and to make sure they can collect bids and go through a good faith negotiation process on this. And locals don't like this, and they would like to be removed from this process all the time. So every year we get a parade of bills for people asking for special exemptions from the Surplus Land Act, and we've done a very good job of defeating them over the last couple of years. I want to say a lot of appreciation to Assemblymember Ward from the chair of the Assembly Housing Committee for especially taking a stand on SB 1439 with Ashby. Senator Ashby was looking for a very specific exemption to this bill to allow for land in the middle of Sacramento's downtown to go towards expanding a hospital. But the land had already been put out for bid, and members of NPH were already in negotiation with this agency over how to develop affordable housing on there. And this law was coming in after the fact to try to disrupt that. So really appreciative to Assemblymember Ward for taking a principled stand on that bill. and not allowing for exemptions that would then open up for more and more and more exemptions in future sessions. We also have this update to RENA. This is a bill from aforementioned Assemblymember Ward, AB 3093. This one's being done in concert with the administration, Governor Newsom. And what this does is that the RENA requirements are kind of stratified into various levels of affordability. You've got to build housing, but not just any kind. You have to build them at certain income levels. And previously, or currently rather, the affordable housing level is too broad. It covers too many levels of affordability, and it's not specific enough. So what this bill does is it adds new categories to that RENA requirement so that we can adequately describe ELI and a somewhat new category, ALI, acutely low income, and the needs that are in each one of these communities that is doing a regional housing needs assessment. One more point on that one. This one may be a little bit difficult. We're in support of this one, but it's not fully helpful to talk about ALI, the new category that they're kind of adding here, if we're not talking about operating dollars. It's easy to talk about the rest of the categories of affordability for the development here, because those things can be solved with capital dollars. You can make affordable housing. But once you get down to the lowest of the low levels here in affordability, you're talking about permanent supportive housing. And those developments need to come with additional operating dollars to make sure that there are successful outcomes for those residents as well. So this presents new challenges, but it's an important step forward in how we are talking about the RENA process. Now we can go next. We also saw a few bills here on tenant protections. AB 846 from Assemblymember Bonta in the East Bay was looking at responding to a number of really concerning cases from for-profit affordable housing developers in our area and across the state of California doing sudden rent increases. The low-income housing tax credit program already has limits on how much you can charge. But sometimes people don't raise those rents. And as they don't raise them over years and years and years, there's kind of an allowance left for them to still continue to raise those rents. And people decided to take a lot of those rent increases all at once. So we heard tales of 15%, 18%, 20% rent increases suddenly on people who were like just coming out of the deepest part of the COVID pandemic here. So this bill was to address that. And while this bill was going through the legislature, TCAC also stepped up and said, we think that we can take action on this now. That's the Tax Credit Allocation Committee that oversees the low-income housing tax credit program here in California. They said that they could take action on it now, and what they did is they put something in place that limits the rent increases for LIHTC properties moving forward, but they said that they didn't think that they had the authority to change previous agreements that they had with affordable housing developers on older properties. So they could put something into place now covering things that are to come. So what AB 846 pivoted to do was then to give TCAC the retroactive ability to then set that rent cap for older properties, and that's what they did. AB 2347 here addresses eviction timelines, and it ensures that tenants' due process rights are protected during eviction actions. Requires proof that a summons has actually been served before a landlord can request a default judgment, and it doubles the time tenants have to respond from 5 days to 10 days, which is still not a lot of days, but an important step forward for mitigating this whole eviction timeline. That one's from Cory in the South Bay. Another bill from Cory had to do with preservation. AB 2926 is a bill it requires an owner who is converting from affordable to market rate development. So at the end of an affordable housing development's required affordability period, it can convert to then being a market rate building. And if the owner is converting, this bill would require them to accept like a bona fide offer from somebody like a nonprofit affordable housing developer who is looking to preserve that development as an affordable housing development. This is an important thing because we have we have all these LIHTC units across California. Many of them have a 55-year affordability period, but we're trying to build as much affordable housing as we can, and it's important to look also at how long we can keep all of these affordable housing properties to continue to be affordable housing. This is a great bill from California Housing Partnership, and we're looking forward to that one making it through if possible. I've been really impressed that this one's made it this far, and fingers crossed that it can make it a little bit further. A good bulk of the bills that I am going to talk about here now are more on the production side and primarily about simplifying development. We had SB 937 from Senator Wiener. This is a bill that was actually pretty controversial for a little while because it was a very wide scope for the bill, and it's wound up with a much more narrowed scope. But what it did was it delayed the collection of impact fees from before the building was developed or while the building was being developed, and it pushed it back to when the building actually opens, something called the certificate of occupancy. And the narrowing that this bill has received now is that it mostly focuses on affordable housing developments with a number of requirements to satisfy there, but primarily developments that our NPH members would be involved with, primarily 100% affordable housing developments. And it delays those collections of those fees until afterwards, which is something that makes development a lot easier for our members. AB 2353 from Ward. This one gives permission to developers to not pay their property taxes while their welfare exemption app is under review. So a lot of times currently, developers are having to pay that tax while they're in development before they get their application approved. And once they get their application approved, they get a refund. So it's not helpful for them to have to be tying up all of that additional funding in this process, only to understand that they know that they're going to get this thing refunded. So this is making this a little bit easier on folks developing housing. AB 2340 from Alvarez is changes to monitoring fees. Because of the way that affordable housing is often funded through a number of funding sources. All those sources come with their own requirements. And oftentimes those requirements involve monitoring to be able to have the agency that is funding this development to check up on it and make sure it's doing well. But sometimes those are very duplicative. Sometimes there's a lot of overlap. And what this bill is looking at is where can we say that we are obviously double dipping on these monitoring requirements, and where can we do a few fewer of them. There was good dialogue on this bill with cities looking to still continue to monitor buildings that they had put a lot of their either general fund or general obligation bond money into, and that one's doing well. I'm impressed that it's made it this far. AB 3068 from Haney is a bill. This one is on the adaptive reuse, expanding, making it easier for people to do adaptive reuse. This has been a hot topic after COVID, with there being fewer and fewer interest in office buildings in downtown, which is really just a cyclical thing. Like, people will come back to a lot of these downtown office spaces, but there are a lot of administrative hurdles you have to go through to get from an office building to a housing development, surprisingly. So another bill making that one a little bit easier. AB 1820 from Shivo. It would require cities to provide an estimate of impact fees required for a proposed housing development at the time of the building permit application, instead of surprising people later after that building permit application is turned in. A lot of times these impact fees are really, really high, and a lot of times the fee is just yet another thing that a local government will do that is not friendly to housing, to make housing even more discouraged. AB 1053 from Gabriel. This is actually a holdover bill from last year. Sometimes bills can last from the first year of the session to the second year of the session. But this would require HCD to offer construction lending and to allow for that financing to be moving instead of just waiting for the end of a construction period to be supporting that building. So all of these are like pretty arcane. They're pretty in the weeds details, but it speaks to how difficult and how complicated housing development is. And the way that we've constructed our system here in California with so many competing sources of funding and so many layers of bureaucracy, that it takes a lot of work to make sure that these layers can all function together. Let's go to the next one. Let's talk about some areas we didn't see a whole lot of progress. And I want to say it's not for lack of trying. I appreciate all of the authors here that I'm going to mention, that these are really sticky issues, and it is important for us to be continuing to try to solve some of these things. Again, as I mentioned, a huge overarching theme of this year's legislative session was the lack of funding, the budget deficit that we were facing. So AB 3160 from Ward is a bill to make those enhanced state tax credits, the ones that I mentioned earlier. We got 500 million of them back in this year's budget, to make that a more permanent allocation. This is important for our developers because our developers need the regularity. They need stability in being able to plan for those credits being around. And those credits, again, are extremely useful in leveraging other sources of funding elsewhere. But that's really the lone funding bill that we have seen this year. No new sources of funding. There was an attempt from Mr. Ward also to run a bill to end the homeowner's exemption on your second home and use that money to be able to fund a lot of the HCD affordable housing programs. And that bill died very quickly. People with second vacation homes are very, very well connected in the legislature and managed to kill that bill in this session and every other session that has been tried. Another huge issue that we've been facing is the rising cost of insurance. This has been something that's been facing really everybody, but there are unique challenges to the affordable housing industry on how we're going to deal with this rising cost of insurance. A for-profit building can often just pass that cost along as rent, but affordable housers are limited on how much they can charge based on statute and based on their mission on how much they can charge their tenants. So looking at how we approach this insurance crisis in a way that we can solve issues for maybe single family homeowners that doesn't just move that cost over to multifamily housing developments is going to be really important, because these companies are definitely looking at the whole of California, the whole of all these housing types as their portfolio of risk out here. So making sure that affordable housing is represented in all these discussions is going to be really important. And Enterprise has been doing a lot of great work here on putting together a working group for Bay Area folks to talk about the impacts of insurance here. If you're not part of that, if that's something that's been a big issue for your organization, please reach out to me. I know we'll share my contact information about this. They've been making good progress on slowly shaping some policy suggestions to bring up in another future legislative session. We've also had lots of difficulties with investor-owned utilities. These are the kind of for-profit energy companies. You would know, like PG&E is probably the one here. And we've had a lot of difficulty with affordable housing developments that are fully built. They have everything ready to go. People are ready to move in, but it's not plugged into power. And then PG&E lets the developer know that the soonest they can make it out there is in a few months, which is extraordinarily frustrating to have all of these things lined up and to just be ready to open your building, and then you can't get power here. So SB 1210 from Skinner was an attempt to force them to a more public timeline, to be open and honest about what people could expect from them. And that bill has been very much whittled down to its current status, which I'm not sure how impactful it will be at this point, but it is requiring that these investor-owned utilities, are more forthright about the cost that they expect something to cost, and the timeline that they can provide their services on. We're also coming off of probably a decade now of pretty solid streamlining bills that focus on a variety of kinds of affordable housing. And we're kind of running out of types to streamline, but we still had a couple here, and I just wanted to mention them. But I also wanted to say that there is a sense in the legislature that that the legislature has done their part, and that they have done a lot of streamlining work, and they're really waiting for all of the affordable housing to start springing up, because they've cleared the pathway for it with streamlining. But now the bottleneck that most of us face is affordable housing funding, and maybe the streamlining has had a beneficial effect on how costly it is to develop housing, but there is a lot of work left to do on getting all of these affordable housing projects funded. So we still had SB 1359 from Becker, which primarily focuses on low barrier housing solutions, not really permanent affordable housing solutions, which is where our membership would be. We had AB 2243, which is an update from WIX to the previous bill that we were very supportive of and partners on, AB 2011, which was about streamlining developments in commercial zoning. This one changes a little bit so that there is a more allowable radius for development nearby highways if there are established, or if there are good practices in place at that development to make sure that air quality is good and safe for tenants. And then the last one on here is just a sad note to end on, but the one bill that we were running this year was an update to SB4, our bill to streamline developments owned by faith communities and by not-for-profit colleges, AB 2728 with Gabriel. That one died. We were just updating it to make sure that HCD was tracking all of the units that we develop because of that one. All right, is that the last slide here?
I believe it is.
That is. All right, Cory, what do you want to talk about?
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful dive into what's been going on in Sacramento this year, and hopefully it's helpful for people. I know some people here are newer to advocacy, and some people on this call have done a lot of this, but I think you did a great job hopefully addressing all of those. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and we're definitely going to get to those. I do have a couple of questions of my own coming out of that, so I'm going to be a little bit selfish and ask a couple questions first. But I do want to say, if anyone who hasn't posted a question in the chat has a question, please feel free to throw it in there, and we'll get to as many as we can. So first, I want to address something that we didn't talk about yet, which is Prop 5. So Prop 5 is a statewide constitutional amendment measure. It was placed on the ballot by the legislature, and if it passes, it'll make it easier to pass housing and infrastructure bonds across the state. So right now, in order to pass a housing or an infrastructure bond, you need a 2/3 vote, whether it's a regional, statewide, or local one, which is crazy and undemocratic and holdover from an old conservative law from decades ago. We already lowered the voter threshold to 55% for school bonds a couple decades ago, and so Prop 5 would align housing and infrastructure bonds with school bonds, lowering the voter threshold from this wild 2/3 requirement down to 55%. So we're pretty interested in that, especially our affiliated 501c4, the SB at Home Action Fund, is very excited, and we're going to be doing a lot of work around Prop 5. But I wanted to ask you if you can tell us anything about the process in Sacramento for the legislature getting to that point where they had to have a 2/3 vote in both houses in order to get that on the ballot, because we think that's a pretty interesting story, but it's kind of a lot of stuff happens behind the scenes, and seems like it might have been interesting. You might have some more insights on how that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So we in California have a very unique system, to put something to the voters as an initiative on a November ballot here or elsewhere. And in order for us to put something on there, there are a couple of paths to do that. The legislature has a path to do that, and they have to meet a higher threshold, especially for something that is going to be a constitutional amendment, like Prop 5 would be. And then the other path is to go by, and I'm sure you've run into people collecting signatures on the street to get things onto a November ballot or another ballot. And so we opted to go through the legislative process to support Prop 5 here. And we partnered with some Assemblymember Aguiar Curry, who has been a champion of infrastructure spending for a long time. And we thought that this was a good marriage for infrastructure spending and as well as housing, two very popular things for residents in California. And the initial version of it that went on there was a very hopeful version that included something called special taxes. This was the ACA 1 that you may have heard talked about before. And so special taxes encompassed a lot of other taxes that a local government might be able to levy. And with more polling, with more talking to other players that were in the discussion there, it became clear that the additional inclusion of special taxes would make it extremely difficult to get Prop 5 across the finish line with voters. So there was an additional measure that was then added to ACA 10, was then used to update Prop 5 on that ballot. So it was very confusing, but it was only an ACA and going through, again, that higher threshold process that could amend another ACA instead of just doing it through a normal bill. To complicate that again, we had another just plain old legislative bill that was also working its way through that process to add some more clarity on what would happen with Prop 5. And it was, important updates here on like clarifying that money raised through these local bonds would be, what the allowable uses would be, and to include things like affordable home ownership with like our partners and members over in Habitat for Humanity. But we didn't need to include those things with the higher vote threshold in something like ACA 10. So that can go in a purely normal legislative vehicle. Whereas the larger, like the removal of special taxes had to go through in the ACA 10. So an extremely confusing process had to go through that. But what we wound up with here is Prop 5, which now will change the voter threshold to 55% and hopefully allow for local communities to be stepping up to fund the affordable housing that they really need and take some of the pressure off of the state. And this is something that NPH has been working on for many years, and we're very excited to be supporting it in November.
Great, thanks for that background. So we had a couple of questions in the chat, one of which was asking about how are our legislators in Santa Clara County? So we have 3 senators, Senators Becker, Cortese, and Wahab, who represent Santa Clara County. And we also have 6 assembly members, Berman, Pellerin, Calra, Lee, Lowe, who won't be in the assembly next year, and Rivas, who's Speaker of the Assembly, represents the southern portion of our county. I'll go ahead and actually take this one, and I'll say we have a great delegation on housing in Sacramento from Santa Clara County. They are really good. And that is different than some other parts of the state, and we're really lucky in that regard, I think. And they all get it. I mean, the housing crisis, as we know, is so severe here, it's hard not to get it. And if you're involved civically in this area, but I do think that it is noteworthy that every elected official gets a lot of comments and a lot of pressure from a lot of people on a lot of things. And so it's just important that we are always showing up, whether at their public events when they host office hours or public events and discussions, emailing them, calling their offices. It's important that they keep hearing from us, people who care about housing, just to make sure that they don't forget that it is top of mind for their constituents, and we want to make sure it stays top of mind for them. So that's what I'll say about our local legislators from here. We also had a question about a couple of specific bills. So SB 450 was an update and amendments to SB 9, which was about duplex and lot splits from last year. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe SB 450 is dead, unfortunately. Is that correct? It looks like the last time it came up for something was last year. So I think that one's not moving right now, unless I might be mistaken.
Just doing some quick check-in on my part here, but I think both of these are moving.
Oh, I might have been wrong about 450. Sorry.
450, the Atkins bill here has been ordered to third reading as of yesterday.
Oh,
Still, it looks like it is still moving. It's not a bill I've been following, so I don't know if the version that is continuing to move is still meaningful to the people who are asking.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So it's
A lot
better
of
news.
crossed out red language on it. So
Gotcha. And then also 1123 also looks like it's moving. So SB 1123. Do you know much about this one? Do you want to talk about it for a quick sec?
I do not know about this
Okay,
one.
so sorry. So I think this one is updates to SB 684 from last year. So SB 1123 and last year SB 684 are both from Senator Caballero, and this is about making it legal to build up to 10 homes on vacant lot sites and in single-family zones near jobs and schools and transit and things like that. So it looks like there may be some hope there.
I will say,
oh, and actually, go
I
ahead.
don't know if you want to talk about leadership changes, but
Yes,
11,
so actually, let's talk about that.
Yeah, 1123 is a Caballero bill, and Caballero received a very, very good appointment to be running the Appropriations Committee over on the Senate side, which means it's going to be really hard to kill a Caballero bill. That is a very powerful position, and people want to be nice to you so that you are also good to their bills. That isn't to say that those bills are guaranteed to get signed. They may still face a lot of challenges with the governor. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of which, so I think you mentioned earlier that the legislature is coming back. A lot of the members of the legislature have been in Chicago this week for the Democratic National Convention because we do have such a supermajority of Democrats in both houses. Next week, you mentioned, is a busy week. It's the last week to get bills out of the legislature and get them to the governor's desk. And then the governor has a month to sign or veto bills. When the governor comes back from Chicago and sees those bills, do you have any insights into what kinds of things Governor Newsom might be looking at when he's deciding what to sign, what to veto?
Absolutely. So anything that goes against Governor Newsom's pretty stated proposals is going to be a very likely veto. So things that are spending additional money, trying to raise additional resources right now, are not going to fare well with him. Things that are going to countermand any of his stated policy positions, things that he feels like don't really align with, all of the programs lining up with Proposition 1, things with home key. It's been very clear where he would like to see his energy and the state's energy go towards on solving homelessness and building housing. So if he just feels like those things don't really align with his vision, it could be a likely veto. Broadly, things that are we have this balance of power between the legislature and the executive office here. So things that are infringing upon the ability for his agencies to do things or take power away from them, he's not going to like that either, because that's cutting into his executive power as well. So there were bills that we were worried about, for example, with the Surplus Land Act, that might be asking HCD to do things differently in a way that would change their ability to do their work. And that's somewhere where the governor would come in and do his best to protect his agencies. Of course, these bills may make it through on any kind of larger agreement, larger deal that might be worked out, that he may be allowing for something to happen and give up a little bit of executive power in exchange for something else. So it's very hard to see, and Governor Newsom is a good governor at keeping everybody guessing. So you kind of have to sit tight and wait for the month of September.
All right. Well, there might be some more opportunities for people to weigh in and nudge him. I'll get to that in a sec. There have been some big changes in the leadership in the legislature this year.
Yeah.
I know we only have a few minutes left. We got some close-up stuff that we want to make sure people hear about. I don't know if you want to just take a minute or so to talk about those leadership changes, especially Robert Rivas, who again represents us here in Santa Clara County.
Absolutely. This was a really exciting shift for housers. There was an exchange of power here in the California Assembly this year, in which Robert Rivas was moved to the speakership role. And with that comes the responsibility of naming all of the, your supporters then to important roles throughout the Assembly itself. So powerful committees get appointed by by the speaker, and we saw people like Assemblymember Wicks, who is a very strong supporter of housing, get elevated from the Housing Committee into her role as appropriations chair over here. So with the shift in power to Mr. Rivas, we have seen a lot of housing champions elevated, and we saw that reflected through a lot of the budget discussions we saw. The House was a very, very strong advocate for affordable housing funding and for reinstating the cuts that we saw proposed by the governor. Now, on the other side, we also saw a change of leadership in the Senate to Mr. McGuire from the North Bay. His constituency was far more concerned with issues of climate. There have been a lot of bad fires in the area, which have been very harmful for a lot of housing issues there as well. But his priorities primarily aligned with the schools and the climates, and we saw those bonds really went out in those discussions there as well. He's also terming out in not too long, so there will be another change in power in the Senate as well, and we will see where things land with the Senate. But as advocates for affordable housing, we are hoping that the California Senate is a more friendly place to, or a more vocal supporter of housing in the future.
Great. And I'll just one last question, which is if people want to stay in touch with you and NPH, is there a good place for them to do that?
Absolutely. You can check out our website, nonprofithousing.org. You feel free to email me. My email is jt@nonprofithousing.org. We're a membership organization. We offer a lot of events like this, and as well as working groups for our membership to be engaged in legislative, regulatory, and many other aspects of the work for affordable housing providers. Our membership is pretty broad. We've got city departments, architects' offices, all the people that are involved in developing affordable housing. There's plenty of room for even just advocates who are interested in getting involved with us. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you again for the conversation and the presentation. This has been super informative. So before we wrap up, a couple things. First, I'm going to encourage everybody to make sure your chat is open, because we're going to drop some stuff in the chat for you. First off, we want to talk about our call to action. So this is our policy in action series, and we do always have a call to action. We actually have two quick calls to action. One is sign up for the newsletter for our 501c4 affiliate, the SB Home Action Fund that I mentioned earlier. So when we send out action alerts and ways that you can add your voice to ours and together, you'll be sure to be getting those updates. Also, like we've mentioned a couple times, it is important, in particular from now through June of next year, that our 3 senators and our 6 assembly members do hear from housers regularly, just so we can make sure that housing stays top of mind for them as they're going into those budget negotiations, as they're thinking, okay, we've got to struggle about, to figure out where to spend money, and we're going to be in negotiations with the governor and other people. Make sure that they know that we have their back when they want to prioritize housing. So we're dropping a link in the chat for Find Your Rep, so you can double check which Senate and which Assembly district you are in. Call them. Their contact info is on the website. Call their office. Talk to their staffers. I'm a former staffer. Go and call their staffers. Tell them how important this is, especially in the budget. Go to their public events. If you have any kind of relationship with anybody who's a staffer or an elected official in the legislature, use those connections if you have them, and you can build them by going to their events and reaching out to them and getting to know their staff. They want to hear from you. That's what they're there for. All right, so with our call to actions out of the way, I'm going to pass it over to Reva on our team for a quick discussion about SVO membership.
Yeah, thank you, Cory. We're almost at time, but hold on for one more minute. We do have some exciting news to share with you. So at SB at Home, we believe everyone deserves a safe, stable home. If you do too, we invite you to join us as a member. When you join SB at Home, together we can build and sustain a movement for affordable housing in our community. Because you're so important to us, we want membership to be open and accessible to everyone. So there's no minimum cost to join. Feel free to pay whatever you can. Your membership helps support our work, including programs like Policy in Action Today. You can find the link to join us in the chat. Also, before we let you go, it's important that you take this 3-question poll to give your feedback on how the event was today. And thank you, JT, for joining us and having this informative discussion. I for sure learned more about our legislature timeline and how we can and when we should advocate for housing bills and budget from your presentation. And thank you everyone for being part of this conversation. We do have 2 upcoming events for you. We are excited to invite you to our deep dive on affordable housing finance on August 28th at 1 p.m. via Zoom. Don't miss out to learn more about and get your questions answered about affordable housing finance. And we also have the September PIA. Mark your calendars for our next event on September 20th at 12 p.m. where we'll discuss upcoming election and what it means for housing policy. The links for both the events are dropped in the chat for you. And finally, we would love for you to stay connected with us. We are on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Also, you can sign up for our newsletter by scanning the QR code on the slide. We promise you won't regret it. And thank you once again. Have a wonderful weekend.